Hi, I'm Dan Nejfelt, Director of Messaging and Online Engagement at Faith in Public Life. And I wanted to take a few minutes today to speak with you about the moral messaging around counting every vote in this crucial election, as well as speaking in the media in such a way that they'll understand your message. So I'm going to share some slides, and then we'll jump right in. So we're right now, as I record this, we're less than 1 week out from the election. And we know that election night, November 3rd, may not be when a definitive result on the presidential election, as well as several other races, are announced. Now, regardless of how long counting votes takes, whether it's called that night, whether it takes a week, whether it takes even longer, uh, we want to keep several important messaging principles in mind that are relevant across all these circumstances. One is that moral messaging is a must. Talking about what's right and wrong, speaking of it in the language of your faith tradition is really, really important. And that's what sets your voice apart as a person of faith. Second, regardless of whether things are really tight or any results are being contested or not by anyone, the message and the demand of count every vote is crucial. And third, composure and resolve are really essential. This could be a pretty long election season. So speaking in such a way that will help your audience stay composed and be resilient and have resolve is crucial. I want to make one thing really important clear is that when we say it's important to help people have composure, composure can coexist with anger, with triumph, with fear, with anxiety. Being composed does not mean being passive. We're trying to keep people ready to act in whatever way the moment calls for, rather than be passive observers. We just really want to be clear that composure equals resolve and readiness rather than being passive. These are some really important do's and don'ts around communicating on this election and pretty much across many other issues. These are good rules of thumb to keep in mind. These are principles that Faith in Public Life has developed over a period of years, and also principles that are election specific here that are from ASO Communications. Do lead with what you're for. We want to talk about counting every vote rather than dwelling on what we are against. When we say what we're for, people will remember and people will join us. When we talk about what we're against, we remind people of messages that we don't want to highlight. We want to help people remain composed and ready to act. The way that we do that is we avoid dwelling on doomsday scenarios, which can be very demotivating. Third, we want to frame counting every vote as a moral issue rather than framing it as a political fight. Fourth, and this goes across issues that you want to communicate about, but especially around the election, we want to strive to be clear and simple. Clarity and simplicity are key. We want to try to avoid striving for nuance and complexity. These are good rules of thumb. As a person of faith, whether you're a layperson, an activist, an organizer, or a senior clergy member, you want to speak in the language of values and principle. This is what sets us apart from an election official or a candidate or people from additional sectors of the community. Here's an example of what I mean by using the language of values. Here's a message about voting and about counting the vote. As a person of faith, I believe every person's inherent dignity entitles them to representation in our democracy. Every vote is sacred. Every vote must be counted, and it's worth waiting for. Election officials must fulfill their responsibility to count every vote. Politicians and the media must resist the temptation to prematurely declare a result before all our votes are counted. Whether you're Black, brown, Native, Asian, or white, we all have a right to a say in our government. Counting every vote is a matter of justice. See all those rich values terms in there. This is the kind of language to strive for. And here's another example of a values message. We the people are not only empowered, but have an obligation to hold our institutions accountable for delivering a free and fair election. Now, what I'd like to do next is lay out a message structure, a sequence, a formula that if you follow will help you be memorable and inspiring and persuasive. Whether you're speaking in a congregation, whether you're speaking at a rally or a press conference in an everyday conversation, or writing a post on Facebook or even an op-ed, across mediums and contexts, this is shown to work really well. And that structure is values, you lead with values, then explain the challenge, then lay out a solution, and close with a call to action. Let's delve a little deeper into what this means. Values, challenge, solution, action. Leading with values means that the first thing you say declares your principles and uses moral language. And in this case, around the election, we want to frame the vote counting process and completion of it as a moral issue. Here's an example. As a faith leader, I believe every person's inherent dignity entitles them to a say in our democracy. Counting every vote is a matter of justice. It's a moral issue. Saying something along those lines right off the bat, that's what leading with values means. After you lead with values, then we want to explain the challenges and even the problems that we face and acknowledge and help people deal with any fear or anxiety they might be having around it. Here's an example of how to explain the challenge around a vote count that might be taking longer than expected. Millions of people voted absentee to protect their health during COVID. It takes election officials longer to count and verify absentee ballots because they have to be double checked. In some states, counting absentee ballots can't even begin until after the polls close. It's natural to feel on edge right now, especially with so much on the line. After we've led with values and laid out the challenge, we want to lean into reassuring people and laying out a solution. We want to inspire confidence in the count and hope about the future. This is really essential. Here's what a reassuring solution-oriented message might look like. When election officials take the time to verify and count every ballot, as they have a responsibility to do, that's a sign that our democracy is working. So this delay makes sense. No one in the media or either party should rush to announce a result until everyone's vote has been counted. And while we wait, we need to do our part by demanding that all of our neighbors' votes are counted. So after we've led with values and laid out the challenges and given a reassuring solution-oriented message, it's always a good idea to close with a call to action if we have one. We want to end our remarks or our written communications by giving people a concrete action step that they can take right away that's local in your community. If there's a vigil, an event, any kind of rally that you're organizing or a partner of yours is organizing, encourage people to show up. That's what we mean by a call to action. And make sure you're coordinating these things or plugging with other local partners and that they're organized. We want to give people something simple, put one foot in front of the other type of action to take. So that's a little bit about messaging around counting every vote in this election. Now I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about how to deliver your message, communications fundamentals that'll help you come through in a clear, memorable, persuasive, inspiring way. First is to get in the mindset of focusing on your audience and your context. Are you speaking to a large crowd of people, whether in your congregation or at a public event? Or are you speaking to a reporter just face to face that will in turn be broadcast to hundreds of thousands or millions of people in your community. Those contextual factors will determine a lot of things about how you come across and the strategies you take. Here's a table that lays out some of the similarities and differences, whether you're speaking in a congregation, like in a sermon, or whether you're speaking at a press conference or in a shorter media interview. You can see that there are slightly different keys to success and time that you have available and levels of theology that you can go into if you're speaking as a person of faith or a faith leader. A sermon, you have kind of an open-ended length of time. You know how long people will tune you in for in your own community. You're focusing on the people who are in front of you and the people who they communicate with by word of mouth. And you can get into very deep theological level in these contexts. Whereas if you're speaking at a press conference, you're going to want to keep it shorter, 2 to 5 minutes. You want to focus more on vivid and concise storytelling than on lengthy rhetorical flourishes and skill. You want to keep in mind that your audience is whoever's going to be watching the news or reading or tuning in on social media or reading that newspaper. And also whoever may be at the press conference you're speaking at. And the theological level for this, you want to go into widely known familiar stories and rich symbols. Now, if you're speaking at a shorter interview, the core skills there are having short messages that are catchy and memorable. And you're speaking to that broad community-wide audience. And if you're going to speak in theological terms, you want to have universally recognized references. Here's a few more tips about speaking to media. How you look and how you sound matter just as much as your word choice do. In fact, they matter more in a lot of contexts. So what you wear, your facial expression, a strong, warm expression, going in a little bit lower and slower of a tone of voice than you would conversationally. These are important things to be mindful of if you're speaking, especially on television. Reporters are only going to use a little clip of what you say in the story that winds up in the next newscast. You might be interviewed for 10, 15, even 20 minutes, and then be on the air for 7 seconds. This is just the way that the modern media works. The way to ensure that whatever small quote of yours is good and drives that message home of counting every vote and every vote being sacred is to lead with your best sound bites. Whatever your best line is that really cuts to the heart of the matter, say that first. And remember that an interview is an opportunity to get a message across. It's not a conversation in the same way that something that would happen over a table would or at an event. Just remember, your objective there is to get your message across. Sometimes in an interview, you get a question that isn't very favorable, that might lead you off topic if you stick to it. You want to be able to skillfully change the subject back to the importance of counting every vote and this being a moral issue. Here's a few on the slide here. Here are a few verbatim pivots that we've seen used effectively in several different media contexts. One is acknowledging the importance of whatever distracting issue they bring up. It's an important topic, but right now I'm focused on making sure election officials count every vote. That's a pivot. If they try and put words in your mouth or introduce an entirely distracting issue, you can say the real question I hear is this. Or if they put something in confrontational or even unfair light, you can use a pivot like, I haven't heard it put that way. What people in my congregation really want to know is how we can ensure that every vote is counted. We want to skillfully and subtly redirect the interview to the message we want to deliver. Around storytelling, if you want to tell a personal story that's relevant to this, just a few tips. A good story for media has a beginning, followed by a middle, followed by an end. It's linear. We want to avoid flashbacks and asides. It contains essential details only and avoids jargon, acronyms, lingo. And it also avoids painting yourself or the story or the subject of your story in a negative light. We want to stick to the affirming details only. And just lastly, remember to be yourself and to embrace your unique voice. I hope this is all helpful. We at Faith in Public Life are very grateful for your leadership, your time, and your voice. And we're here to help. And we're looking forward to being in partnership to ensure that every vote is counted in this election, because every vote is sacred and every person has dignity and should be represented in our democracy. Thank you so much. Bye.